Hello, my name is Samantha Mack, and this video was created for my 45-hour review in the MFA painting program at the Savannah College of Art and Design. If you're watching this video, thank you for taking the time to review my work. This virtual exhibition space is modeled after Sulphur Studios, the projected space for my thesis exhibition. While that will include all new work, I wanted to get some practice in mapping out this space. To preface the work, I'd like to begin with my artist statement. Her death knocked the wind out of me. When my cousin Gina was declared brain dead at the age of 21 after years of hospitalization, she was caught in limbo. She passed on months later. We were a day apart in age and even closer in spirit. Loss propelled me into a journey of mourning through making, and gradually, as I healed, vulnerability bloomed into shared experience and interpersonal connection. Through a process of meditative repetition, I worked stitch after stitch of delicate crochet, forming into a chain of lace, a granny square, 1,000 butterflies. In my light-based works, this accumulation of details diffused through pure light into intricate geometric shadows that shift and dissolve, creating patterns that can only occur through a sheer veil of transparency, a boundary as thin but tangible as the border between life and death. In my paintings, this kaleidoscopic effect is flattened into vibrant layers of pattern and narrative. In my video work, it becomes an infinite loop of composition and decomposition. Through the hybridization of the generational tradition of crochet with image, electricity, and motion, I established experiential signifiers for the beauty of mortality. When I was born, my great-grandmother Ida crocheted a blanket for me. When she died, she was buried with a pillow I made for her. We come full circle. Like crochet, we work in the round, following each other's paths, eyes and hands tracing the same small meditative motions that came before. I pick up the stitch where my great-grandmother left off. To pick back up from where the benchmark left off, I'd like to take a brief step back to winter 2020, the quarter just before I took it. That winter, my studio turned into a laboratory as I began using light and motion to think about mortality. The ephemeral qualities of light and the tactile ones of fibers came together as I explored death through experiential works. These words come from my statement at the time. Quote, "The works pulses if breathing. Darkness sucks the breath out of the room and light restores it. Motors hum with life, turning the lace through cycles of overlapping shadow." Unquote. A fibers elective supported this work immensely, and I also began using video to capture some of the effects I was seeing in the studio. These effects were also a precursor to my thinking about kaleidoscopes, which have become a key feature in my current work. In the spring of 2020, I created a major crochet work consisting of 1,000 butterflies. Created in response to quarantine, Chrysalis represents a key turning point in my way of working, solidifying my interests in multiples, meditative processes, and accumulation. The themes of life and death, closeness and separation, and the ephemeral and the eternal have become symbolized through the butterfly. This recent review of the work by curator Beth Handler-Reeb captures my meaning beautifully. Quote, "Chrysalis, as the name suggests, is a meditation on isolation, generation, expansion, longevity, containment, freedom. Deceptively decorative, the project evinces an indulgent commitment to a repetitive manual and visual production, as quarantine called for. The butterflies are really, really pretty and really, really hopeful, and in the end, it is these qualities that win." Unquote. I'm interested in this quality of the deceptively decorative and the really, really pretty, as the allure of beauty can draw a viewer into subjects even as dark as death. This is something I'd love to expand on in our live talk if time permits. This brings us up to speed from the benchmark. After completing my benchmark project, which featured Chrysalis in progress, I made a video documenting the finished work installed in the chrysalis of my home. I achieved practical effects using light, shadow, and reflection through glass, definite callbacks to the previous quarter. In the summer of 2020, I completed my field internship at Sulphur, and my recent experiences with art steps and with video came in handy in the creation of virtual content for the gallery. I also co-curated an exhibition with Shay Garrigan, represented by the poster on the outer wall of the review gallery. Finally, I spent the summer getting familiar with Procreate, a digital drawing software that's become indispensable in my practice. I now use it to create digital sketches like this one for Wilder, a major narrative painting I created in fall 2020. Based on the life of Laura Ingalls Wilder and my experience of reading her biography during a road trip across the United States, the image is a composite of 4 different quilt patterns: a blanket owned by Laura and her daughter Rose, the Wilder's wedding quilt, a blanket owned by Laura's biographer Caroline Fraser, whose great-great-grandmother made the quilt while living not far from the Wilders, and a blanket made for me by my great-grandmother. The themes of generational traditions of making persist in this work, and I also see it as a more evolved descendant of the ones created a year prior in my very first quarter at SCAD. In those, I applied geometric armatures to crochet patterns using a bittersweet palette drawn from the surprising beauty of decomposition. More on this in the live portion upon request as well. Walder's optimism in the face of life's most harrowing truths is also a theme I carry with me. That death is a constant part of life, and that while we can't control this fact, our engagement with it shapes the course of our lives. I had received feedback in the benchmark to try and use the butterflies in a stop-motion animation, so this piece, called Cycle, Death of a Butterfly, is my first take on that. Early tests for this work used only fibers, but the classic stop-motion medium of clay proved extremely useful in the creation of a changing environment. I went on to use clay again in this work, called Composition, which considers life and death cycles in the division and merging of cells. I was also interested in experimenting with sound in this piece. The original version represents a chord, and editing splinters this off even further into a kaleidoscope of sound and visuals. This carries us to the present quarter. Yearning for another cumulative crochet project, I proposed Kaleidoscope, a work in which each butterfly acts almost as a pixel to contribute to a final image. Originally proposed for the Telfair Boxton breakout opportunity at the Jepson Center, this work was designed with both painterliness and window display in mind. Though I ultimately didn't receive the Telfair opportunity, this work has been great practice in terms of proposing an ambitious public project. Here's an excerpt from the proposal. Quote, Kaleidoscope is a project about the beauty of the collective, the potential for transformation, and the myriad ways in which we may reconfigure ourselves to become a more harmonious whole. In reference to the stunning, shifting patterns they create when fluttering about in groups, a group of butterflies is sometimes called a kaleidoscope. While words like instability and uncertainty have become tired ones in recent days, a kaleidoscope points back to the beautiful side of change. The colored beads, sequins, or crystals in the chamber, however fractured and fragmented as they tumble around, become one through reflection, symmetry, and light. Unquote. This work inspired the one that followed, entitled Bloom and Bleed. As the forms, patterns, and colors in Kaleidoscope begin to suggest female anatomy, I wanted to explore this further in monochrome with deliberate references to femininity and the cycles of life. The work ended up becoming a diptych as different arrangements seemed to speak to one another. The smaller one suggests an egg cell or a drop of blood, while the larger one is in full bloom. I could see this becoming an even more extensive series, as different takes on the red circle could convey stages of a cycle. Reminders of birth and cycles are also reminders of mortality, as part of our fear of death is tied to our own physicality. As Kierkegaard notes, we are half spirit and half animal. The animal half reminds us that we, like all creatures, must die. This ties into my research from last quarter as well. A few notes as I look to the future. Next quarter I'm taking printmaking. I think this will be a great opportunity to get deeper into cyanotypes or blueprints, which I've referenced and explored a bit in my studio laboratory. As we gradually return to being fully on ground, I also hope to get back into physical light boxes and experiential work, this time incorporating the butterflies as well as more complex patterns and layers. As I envision my thesis exhibition, I imagine the space with very minimal lighting, illuminated only by the light boxes, video projection, and deliberate spotlights on fiberworks to create dramatic cast shadows. A working title at the moment is Moth to a Flame. More on this in our discussion if you'd like. Thank you again for taking the time to evaluate my work and speak with me today. I look forward to hearing your thoughts, suggestions, and questions. See you in a moment.